Welcome to Discovering Joy with Roy, Part 3, the New Testament book of James. I'm Roy, and today we're going to take a close look at the first 6 verses of James chapter 5. I'll wait right here while you hit the pause button so that you can read those verses in your Bible. Then when you've finished, hit play, and you'll find me right here, waiting for you. The title for this lesson is Some Advice for Us Rich People. Now, before you turn me off, thinking I must be talking about somebody else because for certain you aren't rich, let me explain. What you and I take for granted is beyond the reach of most of the people in the world. Almost 40 years ago, I read an article that told me how I could live on $100 or less a year. Now that $100 would be closer to, I think it's something like $315 today. Here was the advice. Get rid of all your furniture except one chair and one table. Throw out all TV sets, lamps, radios. Today they'd have to add the computers, the cell phones, the other electronic devices. Dispose of all your clothing but your oldest dress or suit. Shut off the water. Oh, I forgot something. One pair of shoes may be kept for the head of the family. Shut off the water, gas, electricity. Remove all appliances from the kitchen. Keep in the pantry only one small bag of flour, some sugar and salt, a few moldy potatoes, some dried beans, and a handful of onions. Take away the house and move the family to the tool shed. Your neighborhood will be a shanty town. Move the nearest medical help 10 miles away. It will be tended by a midwife. Get rid of the car. Forget the newspapers, magazines, books. You won't miss them because you must also give up literacy. Have $5 for emergency funds. You'll have no bank books, pension plans, insurance policies. Cultivate 3 acres as a tenant farmer. Provided there's no drought, you can expect from $100 to $300 a year in cash crops, paying 1/3 to the landlord and at least 1/10 to the moneylender. Lop off 25 to 30 years of your life expectancy. Nearly half of the world's people, nearly half of the people in the world, I'll get this out right yet, I'm having trouble with this because I can hardly take it in, actually live on, well, then it was $100, now over $300 a year. And they do it much as described here. So you see, we are rich by comparison. The passage in James was written about people who would never read it, perhaps written to Christians to keep them from envying. Note, wealth isn't the evil per se. Remember 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But you, man of God, flee from all of this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. You see, it's the love of money, the prioritizing of money, the pursuit of money above all else that he's talking about. It's strong language. Flee from all this, he says, as you'd flee from a raging fire. This passage of James contains some very good advice for us rich people. Advice number 1, invest in real securities. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Wow. That's not the report you'd like to get from your financial advisor, is it? James' words are tough to hear, but not surprising to anyone who has listened to Jesus on the subject. Here's Jesus. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus wasn't even original on this subject. Here's the Old Testament, Proverbs chapter 11. Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf. Can we even hear these verses, we who've spent most of our lives accumulating, storing up treasures on earth? Probably at no time since the Great Depression have we thought so much about where our security lies. Many of us lost pretty heavily in the more recent Great Recession, but we came through it. Living through those tough financial times permanently affected us. Our children and grandchildren have heard how hard it is for Grandma and me to see them leave food on their plates, taking much more than they could possibly eat. We have to clean ours. When we were growing up, food wasn't plentiful. Twice in my life, I have lost my investments. Both times were sobering. Both times it looked like we'd lose it all. We teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. I should have been prepared, since I saw my father lose everything in his 40s. He ended up living in a widow's rented room while he drove an ancient vehicle and tried to rebuild. Some of you can identify with me. You too have learned how insecure Wall Street's touted securities can be. And now we're grieving as because of this pandemic, millions of people have no jobs at all. And small businessmen and women are shutting their stores permanently. So the first word of advice is invest in real securities. The second word of advice, share your dividends. This counsel is implicit in James' scolding. You have hoarded wealth in these last days. Money can be the root of evil, but it can also be the means of doing good. The Bible mentions many wealthy people, the patriarchs of old, kings and nobles. My favorites, though, are some women that Luke mentions in his gospel in Luke 8. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Jesus and his disciples depended on the generosity of these women. The whole biblical principle of tithing and of giving beyond one's 10% supports this idea. If we've been materially blessed, it is so that we can be a blessing to others. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 16:1, now about the collection for the Lord's people. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up, so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Paul could assume the Christians in Corinth would share what they had with others who were hit by famine. Giving was a part of their Christian walk. Have you ever wondered how much better we'd all be if we shared what we have? I mean, everything that we have. I'm not talking or thinking just of famine relief, but of everyday things. How many of us could get by with one shared lawnmower, for example, or one washer and dryer, even one shared car? I've seen this principle at work in other countries. We might have to give up a bit of our highly valued independence, take our turns, curb our demands, but we could all raise our standard of living a bit by sharing instead of hoarding. The third word of advice, pay your workers well. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your field are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. One thing is pretty consistent. The Bible takes the side of the workman as it does the side of the poor. I once worked for an outfit that believed in hiring people for the lowest wage that the traffic would bear, and then working them as hard as possible. They thought only of their savings, not the welfare of the worker. That experience permanently changed my attitude. My philosophy since then has been get the best people we could find and pay them the most we could afford. I've even become uncomfortable with the barter or bargaining system in which we do our best to get the best price possible, even if it hurts the one we're bargaining with. I've carried a memory from the 1970s. That was before the Shah of Iran had fallen from power. His wife, Farah Pahlavi, I've always had trouble with her name, Farah Pahlavi, 38, the Empress of Iran, traveled to Aspen, Colorado to address the Aspen Institute, a think tank there. She was an honorary trustee of the organization. She spoke on the subject of human rights and equal distribution of income. But to get her there required 4 planes, one for her luggage, and 2 for her entourage. It was pretty hard to believe what she had to say. She visited Washington, D.C., and New York City, and other United States cities before she got to Colorado. She shopped in Aspen shops, escorted through that little town by rifle-toting guards. No wonder the poverty-stricken people of Iran revolted. What does this have to do with us? Just this. How do we pay waiters and waitresses, the plumber, the garbage man, teachers, others in the service sector? And how do we treat the poor, the handicapped, the deprived? Here's Proverbs 19:17. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done. Back in Tigard reminds me of my 53 Plymouth when I was the pastor there. Bob Chapman was a member of our church. He decided he needed to upgrade his transportation, so he bought a later model used Studebaker. And then he said, "Roy, you ought to buy my Plymouth." Well, the truth was we needed a second car for making my pastoral calls. Joy was working. "I think I will, Bob. How much do you want for it?" $15, he said. "Bob, I'm a pastor. I can't drive a $15 car. I'll give you $25 for it." Sold. Well, Bob and Karen had nothing in those days. He was working his way through medical school. And they became 2 of the finest missionaries I've ever known, working among the very poor Turkana people in the desert region of northern Kenya. We're friends to this day. How would I feel now if I had taken advantage of him then? Pay your workers, this passage says. Pay your workers. And anyone you deal with. Well. 4th word. Serve God. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Wow. Again. This hurts. This very language is close to Peter's language in Acts 3:14. You disown the holy and righteous one and ask that a murderer be released to you. That's about the crowd shouting for Barabbas to be set free and for Jesus to be crucified. Crazy values. Kill the righteous one. Set the criminal free. Many years ago, an elder from our Mesa congregation, Larry Stevenson, was in Ethiopia serving in agriculture missions. He told me while he was there, the government threw a $25 million 10th anniversary celebration in honor of their communist regime. Now this they did while at the same time systematically starving their people. Larry said it broke his heart. What breaks mine is that this story has been repeated over and over and over again, even in this so-called enlightened age. We need another prophet like Amos. These are his words. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husbands, bring us some drinks. The sovereign Lord has sworn by his holiness, the time will surely come when you will be taken away with hooks, the last of you with fish hooks. And again in chapter 5, you levy a straw tax on the poor and impose a tax on their grain. Therefore, though you have built stone mansions, you'll not live in them. You will not drink their wine. For I know how many are your offenses and how great your sins. And Jesus himself was not silent on this subject, you know. But woe to you who are rich, for you already have received your comfort. Sobering words, aren't they? And finally, the fifth word of advice, remember the judgment. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the miseries that is coming to you. Your wealth has rotted, moths have eaten your clothes, your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last day. Look, the wages you failed to pay your workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. I heard of a farmer who boasted about being religious, actually. He was convinced that he was better off than his religious friends who went to church every Sunday and tried to live a godly life. He wrote a letter to the editor of a local newspaper. Sir, I've been trying an experiment with a field of mine. I plowed it on Sunday. I planted it on Sunday. I cultivated it on Sunday and reaped it on Sunday. Now, Mr. Editor, what is the result? I have more bushels to the acre in that field than any of my neighbors have this October. He was referring to his religious neighbors who would have been in church on Sunday. But the editor got the last word. He printed the letter, and then he replied so simply, God does not always settle his accounts in October. That says it all, doesn't it? The accounts will be settled in time, but not in October. Well, here's one final consideration. When we have attained the richness of life that comes to us, when instead of serving money, we use our money to serve God, we wouldn't go back to our old worship of mammon, that is money, for anything. Because we will have discovered something far better. We'll have discovered joy, real joy, the joy that comes from a generous life, a giving life, a life that puts God first. That's a joyful life. I bid you joy.